every other country on the planet is about to absorb even more pain than they've already absorbed. And the telephone is going to be ringing nonstop at the White House from leaders all over the world telling President Trump in no uncertain terms that he has to shut this foolish escapade down before he drives the international economy off a cliff.
Professor John Mearsheimer went on Tom Swisser's show to discuss the blockade, the U.S. blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and he lays out how Iran's strategy is tailor-made dealing with the U.S. Let's get into the clip, and I'll save my commentary for the end.
Indeed. And John Mearsheimer, Professor of Political Science from the University of Chicago. Hi there, John.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Josh.
Now, Iran has failed to meet the US demands for a peace settlement. This was in Islamabad. And in response, President Trump has announced a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, these are for the ships using Iranian ports. Now, so we're all on the one page. Let's remember that since the war, this was February 28, Tehran has denied passage to most oil and gas tankers. And now the regime will get the same treatment. This is the argument, John. Will the US blockade work?
No, it not only won't work, it's counterproductive. And let me tell you why. First of all, you have to understand that the United States and Israel represent an existential threat to Iran. And Iran is a highly nationalistic and tough-minded country. And when a highly nationalistic and tough-minded country faces an existential threat, it can absorb an enormous amount of punishment. So the idea that we're going to get the Iranians to throw up their hands and surrender is not a serious argument. Now, there's another whole dimension to this. Why have we allowed Iranian oil out into the global oil market? Why have we removed economic sanctions from Iranian oil? It's because we need that Iranian oil in the global oil market to stop the global economy from going off a cliff. Well, if we prevent that Iranian oil from reaching global oil markets, this is just going to threaten to do serious damage to the global economy. And then there's one final point. I'd be willing to bet that shortly the Houthis and the Iranians are going to shut down the Red Sea. And you're not only not going to get oil and gas coming out of the Persian Gulf and fertilizers as well, but you're also not going to get those products coming out of the Red Sea. And that's really going to throttle the world economy. And that'll force the Trump administration to finally concede defeat to the Iranians.
Well, John, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which you and I read almost every day, even if we disagree with it, President Trump also reads the Wall Street Journal because he attacks their editorials on social media. Now, the Journal over the weekend urged the president to do precisely this, that the US would quarantine all the ships transiting with Iranian oil. Now, your second point there, I think, needs elaboration, because we've discussed this before, that even as the US attacked Tehran during the war since February 28, it was undercutting itself by encouraging the Iranian oil exports, which you just made. The question the Wall Street Journal might put to you is, why should Iran alone be exempt from the costs of its illegal actions in Hormuz, raking in revenue while it starves the rest of the world? John.
It's very simple: to keep the global economy afloat. I mean, we weren't doing this because we were being benevolent or we were privileging the Iranians over the Saudis or anything like that. We did it because it was in our national interest. We did it because we understand that this whole war, once we didn't win a quick and decisive victory, as the Wall Street Journal and President Trump thought we would do, is in a world of hurt. And this could get really serious. We could create a global depression. And to avoid that, we're allowing the Iranians to sell oil. And by the way, Tom, as you well know, this is why we're allowing the Russians to sell oil in global markets. This is why we took sanctions off the Russians as well.
But the Journal would say to you, for the naval blockade to work, they'd actually concede that Trump must be willing to accept energy market pain.
Well, we'll see how much energy market pain he's willing to accept because he's not the only player in this game. Every other country on the planet is about to absorb even more pain than they've already absorbed. And the telephone is going to be ringing nonstop at the White House from leaders all over the world telling President Trump in no uncertain terms that he has to shut this foolish escapade down before he drives the international economy off a cliff.
Again, the journal would say Iran has an incentive to restore traffic in the Strait, as does China, by the way. Their tankers have been given priority. So why should China get leeway and not the rest of East Asia and Europe? That's what the journal would respond to you.
Well, the journal can say that till they're blue in the face, but the fact of the matter is, uh, the Iranians are in the driver's seat here, and the Iranians have no intention of surrendering. They're going to play hardball. You want to remember that it was President Trump who wanted this set of negotiations in Islamabad. It wasn't the Iranians. And in fact, the hardliners in Iran said, don't go to Islamabad. And if anything, their position is going to be reinforced by these failed negotiations. So President Trump has not improved his situation. And the idea that, the Iranians are now going to surrender because we finally found this clever strategy is not a serious argument. This possible strategy was sitting out there for a long time. We never turned to it because almost everybody understood it wasn't going to work, and it's not going to work.
Let's bring in Joshua Landers here about the naval blockade and John's thoughts about the naval blockade. Josh.
Well, I think he's absolutely right. This isn't going to be able to, President Trump isn't going to be able to endure this for long. Already we've seen how sensitive he is to inflation and higher oil prices are here in the United States. I'm a teacher in University of Oklahoma, a red state, but my students are all complaining. And they're complaining in part because their parents are complaining because the cost of living has shot up. Interest rates have shot up, and everybody is worried about how they're going to pay their bills. And that's right across the United States, and that's going to be very painful. And I think politicians, especially Republican politicians, are going to be demanding that he do something to bring down those oil prices. And blockading Iran is going to have exactly the opposite effect.
Now, many Americans, indeed many people around the world, are probably thinking to themselves, how on earth do we get to this point where Iran would have a stranglehold over, or has the capacity to have a stranglehold over an important energy gateway? Joshua, just put this in a kind of historical context. I mean, why did Donald Trump in his first term scuttle the Obama nuclear accords with Tehran? That was in 2015. President Trump scuttled them in 2017. Why?
In the run-up to Obama, when it became clear that he was moving towards a deal and Israel began to panic, a number of top generals in Israel said, we would prefer to have Iran moving towards enriching and moving towards a bomb than having sanctions lifted. Why? They explained, because we can bomb Iran in the same way we bombed Iraq's nuclear facilities, Syria's nuclear facilities. We can bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. But once sanctions are taken off, Iran will move towards 5 million barrels a day, 6 million barrels. They'll become rich and they'll become powerful in the region. We want them poor. We want to beggar them. And we're willing to take the risk of their enrichment. And I think President Trump fulfilled that wish. And he took the deal off that we have to remember kept enrichment at 3.5% and offshored the vast majority of the uranium. It was a good deal. But they Israelis thought that they could get a better deal by bombing. And that's exactly what's led us to the bombing today, is that they set out this strategy, over 10 years ago of let's bomb rather than sanction. And now President Trump is trying to fulfill that obligation, and Israel is pushing him to fulfill that obligation. And that's, and for many reasons, that's why we are where we are today.
Plausible? John Mearsheimer.
Yeah, I agree with what Josh said. Just to piggyback on his comments, if you look at what Vance focused on in Islamabad, it was the nuclear enrichment capability. Very important to emphasize that Iran does not have a bomb and it's not pursuing a bomb. And lots of people in authoritative positions fully understand that. But what Iran does have is the ability to enrich uranium. And of course, if you can enrich uranium, it's not that difficult to make a bomb. And what the Israelis want is they want to eliminate that enrichment capability completely. And that's why they hated the JCPOA, because it allowed Iran to maintain a low level of enrichment capability, as Josh was describing. Well, Vance at Islamabad focused laser like on the nuclear issue, and he made it clear to the Iranians that they can't have any nuclear enrichment capability. They have to eliminate it completely, and they have to give us the enriched uranium that they have. They have to give that up and give it to the United States. But the fact is, the Iranians are not giving up their capability to enrich uranium. We've been down this road, God knows how many times, and the Iranians simply won't move off dead center. So J.D. Vance was, he was wasting his time, and that's why the negotiations led nowhere.
Many commentators have made the point that the Strait of Hormuz has more power than a nuclear weapon in many respects because it can hold the global economy to ransom. And the Iranians might be wise just to let go of their enrichment so that they can just have control over the Strait of Hormuz. John?
You can make that argument, but I think there's no substitute for having a nuclear weapon. This is not to say for 1 second that the Iranians are pursuing a nuclear weapon, because as I said, they're not. But I've said on many occasions in the past, Tom, that if I were an Iranian, they would have had a nuclear weapon a long time ago. I think they were remarkably foolish not to develop one. I think it is the ultimate deterrent. And as good as the Strait is as a deterrent, it doesn't have quite the impact or the power that a nuclear deterrent would have.
Okay, Joshua, John has made the point several times on this program since February.
So basically, the United States is blockading the Strait of Hormuz. So I guess Iran got burned out, and the U.S. is like, "Oh, we'll blockade it for you." It doesn't make sense, and the longer this continues, and this will just make things worse, just like the professor said. And there's no, like, if you're not willing to negotiate and bring this to an end, nothing is gonna. It's just gonna get worse. I mean, how do you negotiate in 20 hours? Like most of the wars, if you look at it, the negotiations took place a year, 2 years, 3 years. But here is like in 20 hours, you're like, we didn't make agreement. Oh, okay, Iran didn't take our demands. So it's like basically you have to take our demands, or we're gonna start bombing you back. So, but that doesn't make sense. But I hope you found this video to be insightful. And if you want to support the channel, and please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.